majority will pass legislation.
I will fight like hell for you every single day, like I've always done and always will.
Passing these bills over the phone, making yet another stand.
Welcome to this special edition of New York Now, bringing you live coverage of Governor Kathy Hochul's State of the State address as part of our partnership with the New York Public News Network. I'm David Lombardo, host of WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and in a few minutes we'll take you live to the Hart Theater in Albany's Capitol complex, where Governor Hochul is scheduled to deliver her remarks. And stay with us after the speech, when we'll have analysis and insights from our panel here in the studio, including Chantel Smith, head of the New York practice for Tusk Strategies, and Ian Pickus, news director for WAMC Northeast Public Radio. And before we hear from the governor, we're going to set the scene for today's speech and consider what we might hear in this fourth State of the State address by Hochul. So Ian, in the month leading up to this speech, the governor has been slow playing some of the policy announcements that we're actually going to hear as part of today's speech. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of those big priorities that she's outlined already?
Maybe it all started, Dave, when we saw Governor Hochul go to a couple of grocery stores. Even on the first day of this session, when you and I were talking during a special broadcast, the focus was on affordability. Even then, a week ago, everyone was talking about the A word. I have to imagine today, when Governor Hochul addresses the lawmakers, that we'll be hearing more details about her proposals for the upcoming year on affordability. We already know she's proposing an increase in the child tax credit and some sort of tax rebate check to go to average New Yorkers. So the devil's in the details, and I expect we'll be hearing more about that in a little while.
Yeah, Chantel, we've also heard some talk about money for school lunches. That's something I know you care about.
Very much.
Today it's been coming out that there's going to be some proposals about accessing SUNY and CUNY schools for no tuition, depending on the diploma you're going for, as well as a middle-class tax cut. You have experience in the state legislature, and I'm curious, when you think about what's come out so far, are these policies that the legislature is going to wrap their arms around and fully embrace, or could some of these be a challenge during budget negotiations or the session?
I think a majority of the policies that the governor has proposed are going to be things that people traditionally support and want. The issue is how much. So like, how much money are we going to get? How much money is the governor going to propose? Is it good enough for the legislature? I think school lunches, that's something the legislature has fought for over 3 or 4 years now. But some of the other issues, like the child tax credits,
yep.
How much, yes, she's increasing it. They'll probably want more of an increase. So the devil is really in when next week when she does the budget. How is she going to pay for everything and the amounts for all these different proposals?
Yeah, it seems like today is mostly about the pomp and circumstance.
Yes.
And Ian, with your media background, what do you think is the significance of this type of speech? Because obviously we here at the panel, we care about this. People at home, you care about this. You're watching this in the middle of the day. But does the vast majority of the public care about this? And if they don't, how are they going to consume any sort of news from this?
Well, we're going to be paying attention to the legislature from now until June. Governor Kathy Hochul wants to set the stage for where negotiations go, especially as we get toward the budget. And this is one of the few times of the year when the governor really does take center stage in Albany. She'll give a speech. It's the state of the state. It's constitutionally required. And she is going to set the tone for, as you say, the budget briefing that comes out next week, and then later on the legislative versions of the budget. So it might not be as much as what's said during her 30 or 40 minutes later this hour in the address, but how that gets covered and crucially how lawmakers react to the ideas that she's putting forward today.
Yeah, Chantel, how much of this speech is tailored toward the general public when you think about this, and how much of it is targeted for the people in that room, which can be lawmakers, government affairs professionals? And feel free to put that microphone back on, and I'll drag on a little bit more, because it seems like the idea is, yes, she wants some of this stuff to permeate throughout the general public and their understanding of what she's proposing, but there's also a constituency that she cares about in the state legislature.
I think this is for the state legislature. I think this is for the politicals. Is it for the people at home? No. I don't think anyone at home, except maybe my husband and our significant others, are really like, what is she going to say in the state of the state? I think what's going to happen is the governor is going to say, these are my issues. These are the things I'm going to push forward. How the news and the press reacts to it, I think, will trickle down to everyday New Yorkers. But the average person, they're just living their life. They're at work right now. So no one's, besides our loyal viewers, no one's watching this.
Yeah, we had some of the legislative leaders on when the start of the session, Ian, on WAMC as part of the New York Public News Network, and we heard from the Deputy Senate Leader, Mike Gianaris, as well as the Assembly Minority Leader, Will Barclay. They kind of weighed in on where they thought the session was going. What do you think about their sort of take on the governor and her agenda? Does it seem like they're willing to embrace what's going to happen? Is it their, trust but verify? What was your impression of what we heard?
I think it was a little more of the latter, trust but verify. I was struck by the fact that the Assembly Minority Leader Barclay said that he had had a conversation with Governor Hochul and she pledged to have an on-time budget on April 1st. Last year's budget, I think, was $237 billion. It was a tough document. It took them some extra time to get it done. And this year, as the Senate Deputy Majority Leader Gianaris said to us, they're looking for more than kind of surface level reaction to voters and residents' focus on affordability. I think in that interview, he referred to the tax rebate checks as being kind of a one-shot and not something that could make a long-term change. I heard other lawmakers describe it in terms of like, hey, if you hit a pothole and your car needs $300 worth of repair, that's that check. So they might be looking for even more from the governor than that initial dripped-out announcement.
I think the inflation check, I think, is a good intentions, but that's $3 billion. So when you look at an average budget, there's not that much extra money to play with. So the lawmakers are like, are we really going to spend $3 billion out of, whether it's tax receipts, it's $3 billion that can go towards something else. When you're in an affordability crisis, $500, though it's commendable, it's not changing your life. It's not life-changing. So instead of giving these checks, we should more think about policies that help the cost of things to just go down for the services in New York, whether it's, the subway, the tolls. We have to look at things that impact people every day, and it's just not like a one-shot. Some would say gimmick. I love a check, but I don't know if that's really going to change hearts and minds in terms of affordability in New York.
Yeah, it seems like one of the bigger affordability issues, at least in terms of a longer time frame, is this idea of a middle-class tax cut. The caveat being, here in New York, your state taxes, your income taxes, aren't as big of a share of your tax burden, as your federal taxes. So you could say we're cutting $1 billion worth of taxes. It doesn't necessarily go as far, but it seems like that's the kind of thing that might have a more long-lasting impact, Chantel.
Yeah, I definitely think anything that can bring substantial amount of money during affordability. But you have to think about it. The government is in control of many different things that impact our bottom dollar. I'm sure they're going to be talking about higher education. They're going to be talking about childcare. There are things that the governor can do that childcare is so unaffordable right now in New York State. So anything that could help expand the access to childcare would probably help right now. Anything to help to make higher education easier and a little bit more affordable, that would help right now. These are things that are within the governor's grasp.
And I want to point out that as we're speaking right now, some of that pomp and circumstance that I referenced earlier is going on. And right now, I believe it's the Albany Marching Falcons are performing. And we're going to hear from some other people taking the stage later on today. There's going to be presentations. And let's hear a little bit of the music from the local band. So, Ian, public safety is kind of that third leg in the stool that we often hear from Governor Hochul. It's affordability, opportunity, and public safety. And on that front, the thing that she's been talking about leading up to this speech has been largely about involuntary commitments, this idea that people who are mentally ill need to be taken in for treatment, potentially coerced, as the opponents of this might say. Do you anticipate that to be something that is controversial this session, or do you think that there will be a groundswell of support in the legislature for something like that?
I think there will be some controversy over that question, and you've already seen advocates from the civil libertarian point of view pointing out that, hey, that's involuntary confinement is a big question to put forward. So she's proposing changing the state's mental hygiene law. That's not a light lift, I would say. I'm very curious to see what else on the issue of public safety is discussed in today's speech, because coming out of the November election, coming out of a national conversation about crime that's been going on for the past year or so, whether it's borne out in the statistics or not, has to be a pressing issue for any elected official, not least the governor, who has seen horrible headlines coming out of the New York City subway system and so on. So I think that will be a focus. Now, whether some of those bigger issues during this session, I mean, bail reform changes, that's a perpetual conversation in Albany now, and we'll see what plays out as we get a little further into the session.
Chantel, when we think about public safety, in addition to the issue I just mentioned, there's also the idea of prison overhaul, given the death of an incarcerated New Yorker at the Marcy Correctional Facility in December. I say death, he was killed by staff there. But I don't imagine the governor is going to make prison reform a central point of this speech, right?
She's not going to make prison reform. She may have protections like increase funding for like body cameras, or maybe making sure that body cameras are always on when you're in state or city or local facilities. She may give money to increase with the aid of the different technology, but is she going to make prison reform her number one thing? No. And I just want to pivot real quick on mental health.
Pivot away.
Mental health has always been a priority of this governor. This is not the first, I know that some of her opponents are like, oh, you should do changes to Kendra's law, and this year was in the budget, and they're like, I made change. The governor has tried to do this. This is not the first time the governor has tried to do it, and it's also not the first time the sitting mayor of New York City has tried to make changes to involuntary commitment. I think it's going to be the main topic. Mental health is going to be the main topic that takes up most of this budget. In terms of bail, I don't see bail being something that changes. I know the DAs want discovery reform. I don't see that happening, because I think discovery reform was done, I think it was 2022, where the defenders, public defenders, and the DAs met and had an actual meeting where things were negotiated for change. I think mental health, a lot of people want to say it's bail that's causing the increase of crime. Actually, a lot of the things that we're seeing in the news is mental health. And it's people with some type of mental health issue that are, unfortunately harming others. So I do think this will be a big deal. I think the houses, the Senate and the Assembly, have traditionally been against, changes to any type of commitment. But if they don't want changes to commitment, they always say, if you want changes to commitment, you have to fund. Like, okay, we're going to put somebody in an institution, but where's the funding for wraparound services after they get committed? Where's the commitment to them after commitment is not the answer without additional resources. So it'll be interesting to see when the budget comes, does the governor include additional resources to basically complete this task of trying to address mental health?
Well, looking ahead, Chantel, to the legislature, what are the Democratic majorities in the Assembly and Senate going to want in 2025? Is it the greatest hits of increased money for schools and additional support for the safety net in New York, or is there anything out of the ordinary that we might get in 2025? If
you listen to both the Speaker and the Majority Leader, they're going to say we're going to continue doing what we've always done, which is champion and fight for the people of New York State. So yes, the governor wants to do affordability. In the Majority Leader and the Speaker's mind, they have been doing affordability. So I think they're going to push for funding. It's not, hey, just give me more money so I can have random things. These are the programs that we think will make a difference to help the affordability crisis. So I think it's less programmatic change, and this will be a budget of funding, and the funding will be very significant this year.
I want to come back to the optics of this speech, because in your day job running WAMC, you're going to be putting together news segments, you're going to be picking out clips, and when you think about past speeches from other governors, it seems like you want to try to get a moment. You want to try to have a good soundbite, something that is going to get picked up all around the state. Is that kind of the most important thing for Governor Hochul right here, to have a moment, to have some sort of storyline that emerges from the speech?
I think the answer to that is yes. The question is, what type of pose does she take today? This is not a new governor anymore, and I think we all have to accept that she has not only won a full term, but she's been in there since 2021. So New Yorkers are fairly used to Governor Hochul. It's also fair to point out that her polls have been lagging in recent months, and
the term you're looking for is bad.
And that the 2026 election is not too far off from now. So I think she does want to have a moment. My expectation is there was a reason that the governor's office has decided to host this speech not in the legislature, but down the tunnel and across the way in the Egg Theater. I imagine that there will be a message made today. And you're right, for that soundbite culture, even in public media where we have a little bit longer to play with, you've got to distill down how you're trying to reach New Yorkers to a few seconds. And I think maybe that's why affordability, the A word, has caught on the way it has in the last several weeks. What's interesting to me is that everyone has their own definition of that. And I think on our special the other day, we heard from a very liberal member of the state Senate saying, yeah, affordability sounds great. Let's make it permanent. And also the Republican point of view in the Assembly saying, yeah, we'll work with you on affordability. Come over to our side a little bit.
Well, I'm not sure the Republican view. They don't have the votes, so while the Republican view
That's what Michael Gianera said, too.
Well, it's kind. In terms of what the governor needs right now for her state budget, I appreciate a governor that listens to both sides, but really she needs to work with the houses to figure out how is she going to get her agenda to move forward.
And I want to bring up the political backdrop for this. Ian referred to the lagging poll numbers for Governor Hochul, but her potential opponents, whether it's a Democratic primary or a Republican general election, are not well known. Right now, they don't have any money. So how serious do you think the politics of this is for the governor's speech as a backdrop, Chantel?
I think in terms of a Democratic primary, I think the governor is in a fine position where she is. Yes, her polls have not been the best recently, but I think we have a general mood within New York of aggravation. And, it's an election year, so everyone's aggravated. You had, on the federal level, people fighting, and I think it trickles down. I think the governor needs this state of the state and budget to be, well received, because I don't think in terms of the primary, but I think a general. I think, we have Congressman Lawler, who is actually in Albany today. He did a press conference with the Senate. I think the Senate or
Senate and Assembly Republicans over at the Capitol this morning.
And he is going to provide a rebuttal to the governor's state of the state. I think he is priming himself up to be the contrarian to the governor and contrarian to the legislature. I don't know, his politics seem a little bit more moderate compared to the governor's last opponent, Lee Zeldin. And I think, that's a person that could give her a run for the money. I think right now she's a prolific fundraiser. So I think in the political stance in terms of the Democratic class, though there may be some hesitation, I think they are giving her the benefit of the doubt to prove herself this session. And as long as some things can be changed and there's kumbaya, unless there's someone that can raise money and has name recognition and is worth topping the first female governor of New York State, I don't see her going anywhere. So.
Although we kind of had that same conversation in 2009, 2010. Instead of the first female governor, it was the first black governor, and this idea that you're going to push out the first black governor, and that was seen as a big no-no. And I think one of the reasons why Andrew Cuomo, then Attorney General, worked primarily behind the scenes to get David Patterson to not run again.
But the difference was that the then AG Andrew Cuomo was seen as a good
alternative.
Like, he seemed like a responsible alternative, a person that was born in political pedigree, and he knew how government worked. I think once Governor Patterson, who was a very fine, nice young, nice man, when he got into power, it was a little bit of oopsie daisy, and it didn't seem like anyone knew what was going on. We had a huge deficit.
Yep, great
the
recession.
budget was like months late. Legislature and the governor were fighting. It was this chaos. you may not like Governor Hochul right now, but there's not chaos. There's a little uneasiness, but there's not chaos. She's running the government. She's running the state. She's working with everybody. She's even working with Trump. She said she will work with Trump.
Although that's not the tone she took the day after the election.
Yeah, but everybody changes their tone. I mean, didn't we just see President Obama sitting next to him at the funeral, chucking it up? And during the election, you know, this man was like a menace to society. So politicians, they change their tune. Let's just see how she performs in the next couple of months.
Do you think there is a case to be made that the governor needs to focus on running an efficient and professional administration for the next year? Is that a big issue for her, or do you think that's already settled?
I think that's settled. I don't think anyone thinks that her administration is not professional. One thing I will say...
There are internal complaints.
Yeah, there are internal complaints, but there's always internal complaints when you're working, because some lobbyists... not me, but like some lobbyists didn't get their way, so they're complaining about the administration. The governor has picked like Catherine Garcia, KPK, Stacey Lynch, you know.
These are her inner circle for the
her
listeners.
Her inner circle of senior staff, Blake Washington, she just got a new counsel, Brian Manera. These are professionals. These are people who've had years in either state or federal government, and they know how to work the system. I think the governor, unfortunately, inherited a bad time to be governor of New York. But I think the issue for her is that she just needs some wins, some good headlines, and no, like, what's the word in sports, like unforced errors. Like if she can go, because last year she had a great budget and a great end of session with the social media stuff. But then that pivot on congestion pricing was an unforced error that caused her months of bad press.
Well, Ian, I want to pivot back to another issue that she's prioritized for months now, which is this idea of restricting access to cell phones in schools. And there seems to be some constituencies that are for this. For example, teachers would like to have these out of the classroom, although they don't want to take on the responsibility of enforcing some sort of cell phone restriction. But then you also have parents, some of whom we heard from Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie has a young daughter, talked about wanting to be able to access his daughter in case of an emergency. What are you hearing on this issue, and does it seem like there will be a kumbaya moment in the legislature on this, or could this be another one of those sort of heavy lifts for the governor?
I can foresee an occasion where state lawmakers after the budget, are back in their districts and they're hearing that there is an appetite to keep a decision like that local. And I also think that there was a very key moment in the development of this narrative, which was deliberate from her point of view. She launched a statewide tour of schools. She brought stakeholders together to have a conversation about the issue. The New York State United Teachers coming out in support of limiting school cell phone use during the school day, I thought was sort of an important moment in the development of this policy. I would expect we will hear about that today. I do think for this kind of thing to be successful, it has to be deliberate. You have to have guidance from state ed with the governor's sign off, and then we'll see how people react to the word. I imagine it would be phased in over a certain amount of time. And I think there's an understanding that you can see what people like the speaker are saying, that if, God forbid, something goes wrong and you can't call your kid during the day, it's going to put the policy, even though it might be the right policy in general, under a microscope.
I think this is going to be a very controversial proposal, because the one thing we do know is that over the past couple of years, we've had an increase of parents and younger people in the state legislature who actually have kids in school. And I'm telling you, with this House uncertain the world is right now, parents are going to have a hard time not being able to access their child in times of emergency. I have two nieces, and if there's something going on, like, I want to know that if I text Olivia and Maya, I can get them. So I think, though it's smart policy, because we all want our kids not to be distracted during the school day, and we want them to learn, but how do you justify like these in cases of emergencies? Like, what do you do? So you can't, my child doesn't, they come to school, they don't have their phone. God forbid there's a school shooting. God forbid there's some type of natural catastrophe. How do you, like, I think that the devil is in the details for that. So, but I do think it's going to be at local option. I do think that. I could see the legislature passing it, putting it at a local option, and then basically passing the buck to your county exec or your like sitting
School boards.
and let them decide and let them take the heat when parents can't get a hold of their kids.
But that's specifically not what the teachers union wants. They want a statewide standardized system and one where which they don't play the cops taking away phones. Could you imagine the legislature ever going against the teachers union on that?
Well, this is the thing, you know, we're making changes to foundation aid, supposedly, potentially in this budget.
And foundation aid speaks to the bulk of the
funding,
state aid that goes out to schools.
The teachers are going to have a lot of things to fight for. Are you going to fight for salaries and health care and money that goes into the schools, or are you going to fight for cell phones? I think if I have to choose, my battle's for foundation aid, and let the governor fight for that. But I don't see... on the education front, there's so many different battles that NYSET is going to have to defend and fight. I don't know if distracted texting in school and distracted devices is the thing.
Well, sticking with schools, Chantel, in 2024, the governor made a big deal when it came to school funding to try to claw back some of the money that schools might have received in cases where they saw their student population shrink. That clearly went over like a lead balloon in 2024.
It was an election year, it was never happening.
Well, and to the point where when a report that the state commissioned recommended a phase out of this policy so that these schools do see a decline in aid when they see a decline in enrollment, the governor basically said, no, I don't think we're going to revisit that in 2025.
I think it was one of those like asked and answered, where last year she was like, let's just tease this out. And she got the response, and she doesn't need to learn anymore. I mean, education funding, if you want to see electeds go to war with you, as a staffer, I was a former counsel and chief of staff to the majority leader of the New York State Senate. Nothing gets electeds hotter than education, because that is the thing that the constituents care about the most, the education of their children and their grandchildren. And if you are doing anything that disrupts or decreases the amount of funding that they receive, it's pandemonium. So I think the governor wisely decided to pivot from that, but she's still considering different factors that are used to determine foundation aid. So we need to see where we land on that and how it goes.
Do you think she makes that a central part of this speech, or do you think that's probably something that gets discussed in the context of a budget address next week?
I think it's budget. I think the A word is the word that she will be. I love how we say the A word like it's a bad word, but like the A word is going to be the word that everyone focuses on, affordability, because what we've learned from the November elections, our people are mad, and the cost of living is the #1 thing in New Yorkers' minds especially, but also across the country.
Ian, I want to come to the idea of covering this. How are your reporters going about covering a speech like this? Do you divvy it up? Do you have assignments based on regions? What's it like?
Well, in the run-up to the speech, we tried to take a look at some of the things that she's already proposing. You know, we were actually with the governor the day that she went grocery shopping here in the city of Albany, and talked to the woman that she went with, and they talked about how expensive things were. To Chantel's point. Geographically, you know, the legislature is huge, and they come from all over the place to Albany. So on a day like today, we're trying to hear from as many lawmakers as we can after the speech to see kind of where the battle lines are going to be drawn, what they liked, what they didn't like, and especially as we get toward next week's budget. I also would really want to spend a lot of time looking at, in depth, the proposal she's talking about. We did one story about how advocates and service providers were reacting to the child care proposal, because as we've all mentioned at this table, that is a key issue for just about everybody in the state. And when we have a little more details after the governor's speech, there will be so many different facets to break down. And I think as you've raised today, it's also what doesn't she talk about? You know, a couple of years ago, the only thing that we covered in terms of localization from the governor's speech was a housing compact and how that would be received. And it got a lot of local pushback in some places. This year, you know, you probably won't hear as much about housing in her speech. So that's also, you know, what wasn't talked about, and are there issues that lawmakers are hoping to bring to the table that the governor didn't mention?
Well, on the housing front, there was a State of the State proposal that was released in advance of this dealing with hedge funds and trying to stop them from buying up single-family homes, but nothing on the level that we saw a couple years ago with regards to going in and superseding local zoning rules. But I do think we will have some talk about new home construction as well as making funds available for starter homes. One area that was definitely front of mind for people at the Capitol today was the Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program. This is a home care area where billions of dollars is spent, and there's a major overhaul in how it's delivered under works right now. Do you think, Chantel, the governor's going to talk about this at all? It's a very controversial issue, but her Department of Health has begun to stake out a more aggressive position in terms of their defense of the transition.
If the governor is wise, she would stay away from. I think right now, there's pending litigation
yes.
on this. So there's pending litigation on this. This was widely unpopular last year. How this got through the budget, I do not understand. And just so folks know, there are these companies, these intermediaries that basically help people. Let's say if I'm wheelchair dependent, they help me with my aid.
The middlemen that can connect you to service.
The problem is that currently what we have under the law from the budget is one agency doing this, an out-of-state agency, in comparison to, I think they at one point had like 300 or 400 different agencies.
Hundreds, yes.
So now we've gone from hundreds to one. And I think people are upset that, there wasn't a phase-in or any type of transition. It's a mass change in the law. And it's going to impact people's aid. Like, how do I get out of bed? How do I do certain, personal services? So this is a highly controversial aspect. I would not be surprised if that's something in the budget that the House has tried to reform. But this is a loser.
Yeah, it seems like every year the legislature will pick a few different issues where they'll try to push back on the implementation date of something, whether it's school-based health centers and changing how they get funded, which was something we've seen in the past, or even this issue where maybe they try to push the April 1 implementation to April 1 of 2026.
I see it being more like, hey, 1 is too aggressive. Let's go somewhere where it's 10 and it's based off, I know there are concerns about religious, organizations that wanted to be the middleman for religious reasons and taking care of consumers, or geographical regions, making sure it's geographically representative
and culturally specific.
Exactly. So I can see it going not hundreds, but maybe you go from 1 to 20 or something like that. But I do see the legislature trying to make changes to this. This is not the best. Anytime you go on social media, I get these commercials all the time, like Governor Hochul, what am I going to do? And the woman's in her wheelchair, and I'm like, oh God, what are you going to do? So it's a big deal.
Well, yeah, Ian mentioned the governor going grocery shopping. In addition to that, she also made a pop-up appearance, I believe, at Crossgates Mall, where she was confronted by a woman who utilizes these services, and it didn't look great for her. So Ian, as someone in the media, do you think this is an area where there are some sort of optics or way to spin this proposal that the governor's championing, or would you rather be on the side of the status quo?
So you're asking me to run some crisis PR comms for the governor when she goes in public?
Or choose to be on the other side of things. I mean, there's probably one that's maybe easier to pitch.
Well, I think what you're talking about is so interesting, seeing the governor in an unscripted place. That doesn't happen too often, right? And today will be the total opposite of that. This is scripted, down to the letter.
Yeah.
So I don't have a good answer for you.
So Chantel, I want you to put on your hat from back in the day of being counsel and chief of staff for the Senate majority. What would you do on a day like this? How would you consume this speech back when it was Governor Cuomo, or I think a couple years of Governor Hochul?
If it was Governor Cuomo, we'd all be freezing because the temperature would be 40 degrees in the ag. But what you do, this is pomp and circumstances. So right now I'd be clapping, not unfortunately, I'd be clapping for the different, you have the changing of the guard, you have dance performances, you have singing, and then the governor's speech is about 30 minutes to 40 minutes. And what I'm listening to are what are the things my members are going to flip out about and what are the things my members are going to like. And if it's something my members are going to like, I'm going to clap. And if it's, wow. And if this is something my members do not like, I'm sorry, I'm
distracted. Yeah, I think we need to cut to the New York Liberty's Timeless Torches and their dance performance right now.
Dressed up in black and white, and you're dressed in that dress I like. Love is
Chantel, I clearly understand why we couldn't do this in the Assembly chamber, because then we wouldn't have room for the New York Liberties
Much
timeless
needed. This is
torches.
part of the aging program. You know, she's probably investing in this program.
We want to talk about aging. That's going to be definitely an issue during the budget, because all we're going to hear from advocates is that there's a huge wait list for services for seniors. So I don't think she's going to want to target the aging population right now.
But I think the governor is going back. So I know for years, this dancing is very impressive. I gotta focus on you.
Yes.
I know for years that it wasn't the assembly power, but under the Governor Cuomo, I remember being in the Hart. Like,
Yes.
this is the first time for
Empire
Governor
State Plaza, he did it in as well.
Yeah, so this is the first time I think Governor Hochul is doing it here, but I do think this is par for the course. Because a couple times people have commented like, oh, this is in, the Hart Theater, and I'm like, it has traditionally been in other places.
Yeah, but she made a big point about moving it away from the Hart Theater, away from the giant Empire State Plaza, and into the more intimate Assembly chamber, with this idea that it was supposed to be reestablishing the relationship with the legislature, given how frosty things had gotten in the end of Andrew Cuomo's term. How do you think about the relationship?
Well, I actually think this is better for her with the legislature, because legislators want to bring guests. And no one talks about this. Legislators want to bring their husband, their kids. They want to bring guests.
If people want to go to this.
This is like a hot ticket.
Again, in Planet Albany.
In Planet Albany, this is a hot ticket. I used to think I was the best when I had my little State of the State thing. Like, this is a hot ticket. So she's actually doing something that is, and it seems that the legislature is enjoying the dancing and the singing. So it's obviously, it might be a good thing.
Yeah, and now they're playing a video. It's the I Am New York video. We're going to meet some everyday New Yorkers who have been impacted by some of the policies in New York.
I've called New York City home for 31 years.
33 years. I've called the North Country home for 18 years.
I have called Buffalo home for over 20 years.
I love New York's tenacity.
Its courage.
Its drive.
New Yorkers value traditions,
Family and togetherness.
From Beacon to the Bronx.
From Lake Placid to Long Island.
From the grid of Buffalo to the gorges of Ithaca.
And everywhere in between.
New Yorkers fight for their state,
their country,
and one another.
Governor Hochul is fighting for those values in Albany. Since taking office, she's driven crime down and built our communities up.
She's looking out for families,
creating jobs, and creating opportunity.
Together, we've supported pregnant women so they don't have to choose between a paycheck and their health.
We've banned insulin copays to help with drug costs.
We've fought retail theft.
We've invested in the future of agriculture and supported farmers.
We've made raising a child more affordable.
We've stood up against anti-Semitism and protected every community from hate crimes.
We've made New York a national leader in technology and innovation with Empire AI.
We've lowered drug prices and protected small businesses.
We've secured a historic deal to build more housing and make our state more affordable.
We're leading the nation when so many are looking for leaders.
On every issue. Education,
women's rights,
mental health,
public safety,
and putting money back and work in people's pockets.
When others step back, New Yorkers step up.
That's just what we do.
That's just what we do.
That's just what we do.
Because we are New York.
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 Thank you, Governor Hochul.
So I think for listeners and viewers, some of those proposals are things that they probably already associate with the governor, like the idea of the prenatal leave expansion, but I really wonder how much the rest of that is actually resonating with people. Ian, one issue that I know the governor is tied to as the result of her flip-flop on it.
Don't say flip-flop.
Well, she embraced congestion pricing to the point where she was, in New York City celebrating it. Fast forward to last spring, we got to pause congestion pricing. This is not the right time. And then fast forward to the end of 2024, and the governor was again embracing congestion pricing, albeit in a scaled-down version. This seems to be the third rail of politics right now, with people loving it, hating it, or my parents being kind of apathetic. What do you think, if anything, we're going to get on congestion pricing or maybe downstate transit, Ian?
You know, I knew this issue was resonating when the upstate New York State Senator Jim Tedisco was pointing to it as an issue he has with how Governor Hochul's approaching 2025.
Yeah, to be clear, his district goes about as far south as Schenectady.
Right. So for people driving into New York City, but you're right, there was such a tortured process with congestion pricing. And to the issue of affordability, when the plan was reintroduced, Governor Hochul said, hey, this is a 40% savings based on what it should have been at a $15 toll originally. Now it's cut down to $9. So I'm curious to see more about something she rolled out in the run-up to today's speech, which was investing in the Hudson Valley's rail infrastructure. A lot of people who have an issue with congestion pricing, including from her own party, Democrats like the Hudson Valley Congressman Pat Ryan, have said, congestion pricing as an idea is fine. You have to give adequate alternate transportation options to get to the city. And for a lot of people, they can get to New Jersey and take a train into New York City. They can't get to a very close Metro North station depending on where they are in the Hudson Valley. So it's not an easy switch to make. She's proposing, cutting travel times and expanding rail. We did a story the other day. Our Hudson Valley Bureau Chief, Jesse King, talked to some people going to a Rangers game from Poughkeepsie, and best case scenario, that's not high-speed rail. That's gonna be an entire night to get down to the game. So I'm curious to see, the details of what she'll lay out in terms of expanding rail infrastructure, which is something we've heard from people in the Hudson Valley even well before congestion pricing took hold.
Well, Chantel, the point Ian makes there about that focus on the Hudson Valley and their transportation needs as it pertains to congestion pricing reminds me of how there's been this argument leading up to some of these elections that the governor is particularly focused on the so-called New York City suburbs, that this is a population, this is a group of voters that she really cares about moving forward, with this idea that maybe New York City is already in the back pocket as a Democrat. What do you think about this speech in terms of something that is going to play to those Long Island and Hudson Valley suburbs? And it sounded like you had a little concern with my back pocket comment.
Yeah, because I think every governor cares about the suburbs. And I just want to, usually suburbs like Long Island and Westchester are bellwethers. And usually you can tell from the voting trends how people are feeling in those districts, what the public sentiment is. I think for New York City Democrats, you're limited. Like if I'm in New York City and I'm a Democrat, where am I going? Like I'm not going to vote typically for Curtis, I'm not going to vote for the Republicans. Right. And, there's rarely any independent choices. In the suburbs, there are independent choices and there are alternative choices. And I think she's concerned about, and there are more unknowns, like blank affiliated, like they're just more unknowns. It's not I'm a pure Democrat or people who actually change their minds. So she is interested in what's going on in the suburbs because that is a voting demographic that is consistent, vocal, and usually tells the path of sitting electeds. So I do think it's important to know what they want and how they feel. And if they have issues with this $9 toll, she should come up with things to address it.
You mentioned unknowns. One of the unknowns right now is how will the federal government approach New York? And I'm curious whether you think the legislative session or the budget in particularly will be shaped by actions out of Washington, D.C., or because this Congress is just settling in now and Donald Trump hasn't even been inaugurated as president again, that you likely think those type of ramifications will be 2026 and beyond?
I think, I don't think this will be a resistance legislature / governor. I think the first Trump presidency, I think there was a lot of resistance because Trump was unknown. We didn't know what he was going to do, and he did a lot of things when his first 4 years. And then in response, New York responded with legislation basically combating all his harmful policies. I don't know if there's much to do legislatively to resist the president at this point. Maybe immigration, because that is abortion we've already dealt with, access to health care we've dealt with in some capacity. A lot of the things that Trump ran on, we have addressed in the past legislatively under the majorities of Carl Hastie and Majority Leader Andrea Stewart's cousins. So I don't think there's much to do. And I also think it's important because Trump this time around is talking about he's slashing federal funds. Do you really want to be this resistance? Do you really want to poke a fight with the president prior to him doing something? Like, do you want to proactively poke, or do you want to wait and see what happens and then decide to choose your legislative battle and how you're going to go about it? We need the federal government for substantial amount of funds. I don't think people understand how much funds we get from the federal government. So you have to be, you know, President Trump is very tricky, so you have to be mindful and just navigate in a manner where you're not putting New York in harm's way. First Trump presidency, didn't we lose SALT?
You're referring to the...
I'm sorry. I don't know. The state and local tax. Yeah, we lost
the
that.
deduction as part of the 2017 tax cut, yes.
So do we need anything? I don't need that. We don't need that. So I think that, you know, I think people are going to, you know, just walk a little cautiously.
But I do think that there will be some effort to address legislation on the immigration front, and even if you know, here in New York there are lots of protections for abortion, I do think, having talked with Democratic lawmakers, there's going to be efforts to expand, say, what New York can do to help people in other states access abortion services.
You know, I think what we've learned from I'm having this debate with all the political folks. I don't know if New Yorkers, and this is going to sound really harsh, I think New Yorkers care about them right now more than other. Like, they care about affordability and take care of. But, like,
I'm not saying this is the right issue that they need to focus on. I'm just saying they will focus on these.
They will, but I don't know if the governor is going to focus on all this stuff, because right now those social programs and all those things, that's not what people. It's clear from the election, people don't care about that.
Yeah,
they care
immigration.
They care about their bottom dollar and their dime. I do think we'll do immigration to do the basic protections, but I just don't see this being like total resistance, doing all this other stuff.
Like, they're not going to codify the Governor Cuomo's executive order dealing with, say, non-compliance at the local level with federal immigration officials. Essentially, yeah, like that's a bill to codify that. Governor Hochul's not going to mention that in her speech today.
She's not going to mention that, and I don't know if some of your localities would even do that. Like a Mayor Eric Adams, is he really going to be helping doing sanctuary cities? Like, I just think the climate that we are in, people are just going to be very nuanced and careful with what they do.
Well, right now, a video is playing where is going to set up Governor Hochul and her State of the State address. So we're going to hit over to that, but make sure you stick around after the speech when we'll have a little post-speech analysis with Chantel Smith, head of the New York practice for Tusk Strategies, and Ian Pickus, news director for WAMC right here. And we'll take you to that video right now.
The greatest state in America, where everyone has the opportunity to succeed. Let's not just march forward, let's soar higher. Let's remember our state's motto, Excelsior.
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 Ever upward. And now, please welcome the 57th Governor of New York,
Kathy Hochul.
Kathy Hochul.
Kathy Hochul.
And now, please welcome the 57th Governor of the great state of New York, Kathy Hochul.
Makes me that much stronger, makes me work a little bit harder, makes me that much wiser. Thanks for making me wider, made me learn a little bit faster, made my skin a little bit thicker, makes me that much smarter. Thanks for making me wider.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank our clergy for reminding us of the presence of God in our lives. Amen to that, right? Amen. I want to also thank history-making Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins for her partnership over my many years now in elective office. Thank you. Thank you. Speaker Carl Heastie, I want to thank you for your friendship, advice, but also for the last 3 years opening up the Assembly chamber to us. A little more room here, Carl. Another history maker, our great Attorney General Tish James. I want to thank you. Our Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. Our Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado. Assembly Member Crystal Peoples-Stokes. Senate Minority Leader Robert Ort. Assembly Minority Leader Will Barkley. And all the judges of the Court of Appeals led by Rowan Wilson. I want to thank them for their presence here today. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has joined us. All the mayors and county executives from across the state, representatives from labor and the business community, I want to welcome them as well. Members of my cabinet and senior team, I'm in awe of you. I thank every one of you for all the incredible work you do on behalf of the people of this state. Thank you. Thank you. I'm also very proud to acknowledge New York's first ever first gentleman, my husband, your first gentleman, Bill Hochul. My fellow New Yorkers, as we reflect on the state of our great state, the Empire State, two things are very clear to me. Our future depends on the ability of every family to afford the essentials of life and our ability to protect the safety and security of our residents. But we will not achieve these goals without a fight. So my commitment to every New Yorker is this: your family is my fight. This has been the impetus and the inspiration for everything we've done for the last 3 years. When we worked together and raised the minimum wage and tied it to inflation, because I and we believe that when costs go up, your wages should too. When we added jobs and boosted tuition assistance, education funding, public transit investments to the highest levels in history, it was because your family deserves the best opportunity for success. And when we battled insurance companies and ended co-pays for insulin, it was because your family's health was more important than insurance companies' profits. And we fought for paid prenatal leave. It was so expectant women can get medical care without losing their income, because the health of your baby and your family should always come first. And when we worked together, taking on the social media giants, we stood up against an army of lobbyists and lawsuits, and we won. It was to stop the addictive feeds that put corporate profits over your children's mental health. And we secured, working together, my partners in the legislature, the most consequential statewide housing policy in 50 years, and we affirmed that New York City is the city of yes, Mayor. It's signaled that we understand that a home for your family, it means everything. And we did all this because your family deserves more money in their pockets, as well as a place they can proudly call their home. And I'll say this: I know our work is not done. Worries about crime, struggles to make ends meet are far too common. Our state has to be livable, and the people here have to be afforded to live in it. And we'll keep fighting for our families and children and continue delivering for them. Safe streets and subways, housing that's truly affordable, and fast public transit that's dependable, and dependable infrastructure. Today I'm going to share my vision for New York, where hard-working people can get ahead, where children can play in neighborhoods safely, where opportunities are plentiful, and where champions are forged. That's how I felt growing up. Parents could put food on the table because they had good union jobs at the steel mills, at the Ford plant, the GM plant, or whatever. It was those jobs. And they always believed that their children would have the same opportunities or even better. It's not to say that times weren't hard sometimes. My parents started married life in a trailer. My brother was born. When I came along, not long after, We moved to a cramped apartment in the shadow of the steel plant where my dad, my uncles, and grandpa worked. Mom scrimped and saved to feed what eventually grew to a family of 8. She made those Spam sandwiches. Anybody have Spam? Sorry, Mom, I shouldn't say that. Those Spam sandwiches were made on bread that was expired, that came out of our freezer. We bought our clothes at used clothing stores or on layaway. But I'll tell you this. We never felt trapped by our circumstances, and we never gave up hope. Let me give you an example. When I was 13 years old, kind of the time of the British invasion and Twiggy, you're all too young, I get it. But I had my eyes on this very stylish red plastic raincoat. Yeah, it was cool back then. It was in a women's store on Main Street. It was an extravagance that I knew I could never ask my parents to pay for. So I saved every penny I could babysitting, 50 cents an hour. It took months. But buying that coat with my own money felt like such an achievement. Proof to a young teenager that with hard work and perseverance, anything was possible. But a few years later, that store and many of the stores around it went dark. The Five and Dime, the soda counter, the last of the remaining clothing stores were all gone. It was the 1970s. Inflation was at 13%. Crime was out of control. Factories were shutting down. Our land, our air, and our water were so polluted. The world was changing. So many communities lost that factory, took the hit, and struggled to get back up. Whether people labored at Bethlehem Steel in Buffalo, Kodak in Rochester, Carrier in Syracuse, Endicott Johnson in the Southern Tier, or Northrop Grumman on Long Island. Over the years, people just felt so betrayed. They had done everything they were supposed to do, but the jobs left. Every single one of my 5 siblings wanted to stay and had to leave home because jobs were more plentiful in other states. That really hurt. It wasn't just the jobs that were leaving, it was hope that was leaving too. I tell you this not to give you a history lesson, but to reinforce why these fights are so personal to me. And I feel like this happened just yesterday, and this is not history. It's the same way the millennials felt in 2008, 2009, 2010, when the Great Recession undermined their futures. I'll tell you this. I don't ever want the people of this state, our neighbors, to have the same sense of anxiety that was so pervasive when I was younger. That's why I decided to stay and fight. Witnessing the struggles and pain of those left behind inspired me to run for office, to be a voice for communities that had fallen on hard times because I had lived that experience. So today, I know all too well, many New Yorkers are struggling. Inflation, sky-high rents, wages that just don't feel like they can keep up, a changing economy, an influx of unexpected arrivals who had great needs, and an unsettled world. That's why I fight day in and day out to make New York healthier, cleaner, more affordable for you and your family. Because as I said, your family is my fight. Yesterday, I had a great experience. I met with over 200 high school seniors from Hudson Valley Community College as well. College students, high school students from all over the Capital District. They shared their hopes and their questions about the future. I won't tell you about them. Let's hear from them directly.
So today we're going to dive into some of the big ideas from your state of the state that directly impact us, the students and young people of New York. One of the things that on top of all this pressure that we feel, peer pressure, etc., we're 17, 18 years old deciding what we're going to do with the rest of our lives. You touched on a little bit of perhaps what students are dreading as they look to the future. In light of the ongoing national debate on abortion rights, how do you plan to position New York as a safe haven? Our teen mental health first aid training program that you've mentioned, if you could kind of speak to what this first aid training program aims to do. As climate change becomes an increasing concern, what kinds of initiatives do you plan to take to mitigate the effects in New York? Many of us in this room are also looking to the future, whether it's college or whatever path we choose.
My visit yesterday was a reminder of who we're fighting for, and that we must show them, these young people, that they can thrive here, that this is where their future is. Let me say this. A state of the state can be full of flowery rhetoric and still fail to address the needs of the people. I believe it needs to be much more than just lofty words. It should be a concrete blueprint that'll deliver actual results that people will feel. That's what New Yorkers expect, and that is what you'll see here today. A bold, actionable plan for 2025 that addresses affordability and public safety head-on. Let's start with affordability.
Coverage of Governor Kathy Hochul's State of the State address here on WMHT.
And how we all plan, and I plan, to put more money back in your pockets. First, I'm calling for a sweeping middle-class tax cut, benefiting 8.3 million taxpayers making less than $323,000. The tax cut I propose today and will fight for in the coming months will deliver the lowest tax rates in 70 years. And it'll save hardworking taxpayers $1 billion. By itself, it's a monumental win for New Yorkers in the battle for affordability. But that's just the start. The fact is, many Americans, not just New Yorkers, have been hit hard by inflation since COVID. Because prices went up, our sales tax revenue went up as well. But I believe this. That extra money does not belong in state coffers. It belongs back in your pocket. And that's why I proposed the first ever, the nation's first, inflation refund. Now, under my plan, we'll return billions and billions of dollars in surplus sales tax revenue directly to 8.6 million hardworking New Yorkers. I'm talking about seniors. I'm talking about recent grads. I'm talking about families bringing in less than $300,000 a year. This makes a difference. $300 for individuals, $500 for a family. I've spoken to many of them. They are very excited about this. This is real money back in their pockets. So let's check. What do we have so far? An historic middle-class tax cut, inflation rebate checks, but that's not all. Families with children, they are the ones who need additional relief. And as New York's first mom governor, I know personally that the earliest years are the most expensive. Diapers, formula, clothes that they outgrow every 3 months. And that's why back in 2023, I worked with the legislature to make our child tax credit available for kids under the age of 4 for the first time ever. And this extended a financial lifeline to over 600,000 more families, because it made 0 sense to me that this credit only came available when our kids were almost in kindergarten, right? Just a few days ago, I met Tasia Brown, a mom of 3. She also had a 2-year-old. She told me that when she received a check last year, it felt like her birthday. She paid her utility bill, bought some extra groceries, and then she treated her kids to dinner, something that was so rare for her. That's what I'm talking about. It makes a difference. And this year, I want to support our families even more, tripling the maximum benefit to $1,000. $1,000 for babies and kids up to 4, and in 2026, we'll boost the credit for school-age children even higher to $500. For parents, it's more food on the table, more supplies in the backpack for 2.7 million children. If you think about it, it makes good economic sense. Every dollar invested in the child tax credit will generate $1.25 in economic activity. That's spent in local stores, spent in our local businesses. Now, there's another huge driver of costs for families that we need to confront. Child care. Yep, oh yeah. Daycare costs over $21,000 a year. Now, if you're making minimum wage, it doesn't add up. That cost is 155% higher than a public college tuition in our state. It's like paying a second rent for so many families. And I know how hard it is to make life work without child care because I lived it. When my kids were young, I had to leave my job because I couldn't find accessible, affordable child care. I loved that job and everything I worked for. I didn't know if it would be derailed. I ended up okay. We're good. But I didn't at the time know I'd get my career back on track, and so many moms across the state of New York feel the same way. They can tell the same story. I want to partner with the legislature to put our state on a pathway toward universal child care. That really matters. That's right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's get it done. In the meantime, we're going to dedicate $110 million to build new child care centers, renovate existing ones, and expand options for families and communities all over New York. And we'll establish a core of substitute child care professionals so someone's always on call. Think about that. Now, here's the thing. When the little ones become older, we also have to support them in school in countless ways. This starts with the most important meal of the day, breakfast, and goes on to lunch. The research is crystal clear. The children who grow up hungry score lower on tests and underperform. Think about it as adults, when you're hungry, your stomach's growling, you're not performing your best even at work. It pains me to think, as a mom, it pains me to think that little kids' stomachs are growling when they're sitting in school and they're supposed to be learning. In the wealthiest nation in the world, this can no longer be tolerated. Not in America, and definitely not in the great state of New York. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Under my proposal, every child will get free breakfast and free lunch in school, so children who are in need are spared the embarrassment and stigma of standing out among their peers. That is now over. And I'm proud to say there's actually some people in this room who help us make this dream a reality. People that are often overlooked and taken for granted. They never should be. I'm talking about the school lunch staff at Albany School District. They work so hard. Please stand. Let's give them a round of applause. Thanks for feeding our kids. Thank you. Thanks for feeding our kids. Thank you. And parents, if you've ever had to get kids ready for school in the morning, can you imagine not having to worry about breakfast or lunch? That's a gift of time, the most precious commodity for harried parents, right? But let me mention something even better, the savings. As much as $1,600 each year back in your wallet per child, not having to spend the money. My friends, what I'm talking about overall, it adds up to nearly $5,000. $5,000. Now, if there's cynics among you, you don't believe me, pull out your own cell phone, get out the calculator, and you can check it, okay? Let's see what this means for a family, let's say 2 little ones, $1,000 each, child tax credit, 1 school-aged, another $500, meal savings, $1,600 for that child. While you're at it, throw in the $500 for your family rebate, plus your tax cut savings. Now we're approaching $5,000 in real money back in your pockets. That's how we make New York more affordable. And we will never stop finding ways to put money back in your pockets. This is something I've done every year as governor. But there's another fight that I'll continue to take on. Our state must be livable and safe. My fight for your family also means New Yorkers feel secure on the streets, on our subways, in their communities. And we're going to do this with common sense measures that everyone can get behind. Because people should be able to get to work in the morning, attend to play, enjoy restaurants, without the fear of random violence or dodging someone in the midst of a mental health crisis. We cannot allow our subway to be a rolling homeless shelter. We've invested $1 billion already into reforming our mental health system, working with the legislature. They know how important this is. I want to thank them for partnering with me on that. As part of this investment, we've dedicated teams working day and night, working with the city to help get severely ill and homeless off our subways into supportive housing. But we know it's not enough. Our laws must be stronger. And that's why I'm willing to stand up and say we need to expand involuntary commitment into a hospital to include someone who does not have the mental capacity to care for themselves, such as refusing help for the basics, clothing, food, shelter, medical care. Now, critics will say this criminalizes poverty or homelessness. I say that is flat out wrong. This is about having the humanity and the compassion to help people incapable of helping themselves, fellow human beings who are suffering from mental illness and putting their lives and possibly the lives of others in danger. Julie LeClaire-Netjes is a tireless advocate who knows the importance of compassionate care. She lost her daughter, Alex, after a long battle with mental illness. Alex was a bright woman, attended Dartmouth and NYU. she dreamt of being a writer. Julie believes that her daughter would still be with us today if there had been stronger laws around involuntary commitment, and that if her daughter had not been released from the hospital prematurely. Please stand, Julie, and we thank you for using your voice through all your pain. Julie, thank you. Thank you. We also need to strengthen Kendra's law so those with serious mental health challenges can get into long-term treatment instead of cycling in and out of the system or living on the streets. I know the phrase involuntary commitment reminds people of the prison-like institutions of the past, but that's not the objective of these proposals. We're in a different time now. As a result of our policies over the last 3 years, we've reshaped our mental health system with more doctors and more beds, more effective treatment options, and a more compassionate attitude toward care. Let's just be honest with ourselves. There's nothing compassionate about letting people suffer without treatment on the streets. And there's nothing compassionate about letting people put themselves or others at risk. Nothing compassionate about that. Good. Now let's turn to subway safety. To reduce crime and the fear of crime, we've deployed over 1,250 state personnel, including the state police and the National Guard, to support the city and NYPD's efforts on the subway. And I insisted that every single subway car have cameras being used now to solve crimes. It's working. We've also strengthened the laws against assaulting commuters and MTA workers. And we've streamlined the coordination between our DAs and law enforcement to ensure that when crimes are committed, they're swiftly punished. We've put barriers on some stations to prevent people from being pushed on the tracks. But we need to accelerate these efforts. First, working with Mayor Adams, we'll surge more law enforcement once again and put even more there. I want to see more uniformed police officers, not just on the platforms, but more importantly, on every single train overnight, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. for the next 6 months. And the state will support these efforts financially because we have to stop the chaos. The physical infrastructure must be made safer as well. In my direction, the MTA will be installing even more barriers in 100 additional stations. Also, bright LED lighting in every station by the end of the year. And the shameless toll evaders, fare evaders, will finally be stopped with modernized gates. This will make the subway less chaotic, but also help strengthen the financial footing of the MTA. And will establish triage centers at the end of all the major routes where people can get off, get assistance 24/7. So to recap, this is the game plan. More police where they're needed, safety infrastructure, and critical interventions to help the homeless and mentally ill get the help they need instead of languishing on trains and frightening fellow commuters. I say this because enough is enough. The chaos must end now. I also say, in continuing my fight for the safety of your family, I'm also cracking down on domestic violence, especially when it occurs in homes with children. My mom was a champion for survivors of domestic violence. Her own home life was tough when she was young. And before she died, we worked side by side to create a safe haven for women and children who'd been abused. I saw in those children's eyes as we brought them into this shelter, there was no love. They'd not been raised with love. That's something they would carry with them the rest of their lives. All those kids deserve better. My mom would be so proud of the work we're doing today. So proud. And we're also working closely with law enforcement to apprehend and prosecute the rapists and to keep guns out of the hands of abusers. And when it comes to repeat offenders, I want them off the streets. And I want judges statewide to use all the powers in our recent bail law changes to stop the rinse and repeat cycle of offenders being released over and over without consequences, only to commit more crimes again. And I'll fight to finally close those loopholes that were created in our discovery laws that delay trials and lead to cases being thrown out on minor technicalities. We do. Protecting your children online is another way. I'll continue our fight for your family. As I referenced earlier, New York was the very first state in the nation to shield young people from addictive social media algorithms, succeeding where other states had failed. We'll take on the new and evolving dangers and defend our kids against harmful AI bots posing as friends. This is part of our continuing effort to make youth mental health a top priority, including investing in mental health first aid classes and clinics in our schools. But to truly free our kids from social media, we must give them safe places to simply be kids. It's just common sense. That's why I'm launching the Unplug and Play initiative. We'll build new playgrounds. We'll create hundreds of new opportunities for kids to join music and drama clubs, join youth volunteer organizations, sports teams. These activities are transformative. Just ask Brian Hernandez-Lopez, who's with us here today. Brian wandered into the Ring of Hope Boxing Club in Schenectady at the age of 13. He told the coaches at the time, I just need some way to defend myself. And he fell in love not just with the sport, but how it made him feel, strong and hopeful, confident he could take on anything inside the ring and out. Today, Brian's finishing his associate's degree as a high school student while coaching younger kids at the club. Oh, his future's so much brighter. That's the power of these programs. Brian, please stand up. I've spoken thus far about affordability and our public safety agenda. Now let's turn to something that I also just believe is common sense. A stable home is the foundation of a stable life. But for far too many New Yorkers, it's a dream that feels impossibly out of reach. And I'm not the first one to say this, but the rent is too damn high. And that goes for people's mortgages as well. Housing is the #1 driver of our affordability crisis. And the only way to decrease housing costs is to increase supply. We need to build and build and build some more. In my first State of the State address, I unveiled an ambitious plan to build or preserve over 100,000 units in 5 years. I'm proud that we're more than halfway to our goal and ahead of schedule. But more needs to be done. Let's invest an additional $100 million on top of the $650 million we invested for pro-housing communities. This will target a home ownership strategy that includes $100 million to build starter homes and provided down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. And I'm proposing a housing development ombudsman or woman to streamline approvals and get the shovels in the ground sooner. And we also have to take a hard stance against the private equity firms that have strangled some of the housing markets across the country. We've seen it. You know what happens. A young family finds the home they've been searching for. They're so excited. They scrape together every dollar they have, and then they lose out to an all-cash offer from a faceless, nameless corporation with no connection to the community. Corporate landlords co-opt our housing stock for short-term rentals as well. Or even worse, they just let them sit there vacant while the values soar, and we need every one of them. That's why New York will do something no other state has done before and ban private equity companies from bidding on properties for the first 75 days that they're on the market. Thank you. That's how we'll ensure that single and two-family homes remain available for the families they were built for. And that's how we make home ownership possible for more New Yorkers. And if you're a renter, we'll also ban the price-fixing software that inflates rents and costs tenants $3.5 billion a year. As we've seen with our past battles, we can't unleash the full potential of the housing market without a fight. Seems like that's the way it is. Doesn't have to be, by the way, but that's what New Yorkers expect from us. I cannot and will not back down. We need to build more housing, full stop. And we're showing the same ambition in our investments in transportation, because our job is to get you where you need to go on safe roads and safe bridges and buses and trains and subways. And wherever possible, put more time back in your day. Just last week, I rode Metro North, walked around and talked to all the commuters. They were really happy to see me, I'm sure. No, actually, they're very nice. I told them I want to upgrade the stations and reduce commute times between Manhattan and Poughkeepsie, as much as 15 minutes each way. Now, if you add it up, that'll save commuters up to 130 hours a year. That benefits people like Helene Brown, who's with us here today with her nephew. She works at CUNY, commutes in every day from Yonkers. And I also think about all those Long Island Railroad riders I met on Friday. Talk to them about our strategy, including them as well. We have a lot to do. I love to build. I love transportation. I love infrastructure. We have a lot to do. And since I've become governor, we've been building the great public works projects, some decades in the making, and creating tens of thousands of good-paying union jobs, projects like the Gateway Tunnel under the Hudson, the largest funded infrastructure project in America today. We'll also extend the 2nd Avenue subway into East Harlem, eliminating a transit desert and creating access to better-paying jobs. And the Interborough Express to connect Brooklyn and Queens. We're making progress. Let's get it done. And reconnect communities like Syracuse that have been severed by I-81. We're almost done, almost getting there. And right here in Albany, the new Livingston Avenue Bridge. We're going to keep moving forward with this, as well as an entire package to help build up the great city of Albany. This year, I'm backing an MTA capital plan, and we must end decades of failure to make the hard but necessary investments in this critical infrastructure. Because if we come up short, the future of our transit system and the economic strength of our state is jeopardized. And we can't talk about the future without talking about education. It is the great equalizer, unlocking opportunity for all. Dad's college degree while he worked at the steel plant lifted my family out of their circumstances and opened the doors to better paying jobs. And working with our legislature, again, I thank you, for the last 2 years, we've more than doubled tuition assistance at SUNY and CUNY and expanded eligibility. But now, we're going even bolder. We're going to make community college completely free for students aged 25 to 55, completely free. Everything, books, transportation, for those this will be for those who entered the high-demand fields like advanced manufacturing and healthcare and education. We have so many vacancies. Think about this. If you want to change jobs, you're not sure what to do, you can go back to community college on us, because we know you're going to keep contributing to the great and mighty strength of our state. These are real savings for New Yorkers pursuing careers and puts money back in their pockets while helping us fill these critical jobs in these essential industries. And we will never forget that New York small businesses are the cornerstone of small communities and large communities alike. I know this from having helped my mother and sister start their own small businesses. I understand the challenges they face. And we must create an environment where small businesses feel that the government is not on their backs, but on their sides. Help them prosper and grow. Now, the Industrial Revolution galvanized cities all over the state. I spoke of that. But that economic progress came at a heavy cost. Factories spewed waste and chemicals into Lake Erie. I saw it. I smelled it, stepping over the dead fish on the beach before we went swimming. Yeah, it's a wonder I'm here today. I know this. But today, as we usher in a new innovation revolution, we must learn from those mistakes. And we need look no further than the deadly fires in Los Angeles, a reminder of how fragile our world truly is and what the future will hold if we sacrifice Mother Nature on the altar for profit. Our hearts go out to everyone in California who's lost homes, lost loved ones. And I'm grateful to the firefighters there and the firefighters we have in the state of New York who work 24-hour shifts. They defend their communities from the walls of fire. Thank you to our firefighters. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We appreciate you so much. Thank you, thank you. And I'm so proud of the New York National Guardsmen who've been deployed to assist in California. I worry about them, I worry about others. So please join me in a brief silent prayer for the return of them safely and how this community can heal. It's been devastating. Today, we have one of our own brave firefighters here with us, Chief Alex Nichols. Just a few months ago in the Catskills of all places, he was on the front lines battling one of the worst wildfires our state has ever seen. Thank you. Thank you for your courage today. Thank you. Please stand up. Thank you, Alex. Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate you so much. It's not just the wildfires. Just since I've been governor, we've experienced record heat, droughts, floods, tornadoes, blizzards, and hurricanes. It's a lot. And I want to thank all the emergency personnel across our state and our commissioner and everyone else who gets to just doing everything they can to save lives and property. But my fight for your family also means this. We must prevent these catastrophes from becoming our new normal, because we are the first generation to truly experience the effects of climate change, and we are the last generation that can do anything about it. And that's why, despite intense opposition, I signed the Climate Change Superfund Act, passed by the legislature, and declared it should be the big corporate polluters who should pay for the consequences of climate change instead of New York taxpayers. And every other state should follow our lead as well. We've also recommitted to reducing carbon emissions with our offshore wind off the coast of Long Island, hydroelectric power coming in from Quebec to power New York City. And just this year, I'm calling for an historic $1 billion investment to further the transition to a zero-emission economy. We're going to build power-ready sites for green industry. This is the same kind of effort that helped us land Micron and their historic $100 billion investment, which creates 50,000 good-paying jobs in upstate New York. That is the economy of the future. Microchip fabs, data center, and the supercomputers that power AI, they all need tremendous amounts of energy. And to support these industries, we've already started developing additional strategies, like advanced nuclear microprocessors. This is a good investment, because artificial intelligence alone is projected to drive $320 billion of economic growth in our state by 2038. It's already transforming fields from agriculture to medicine. And that's why last year we launched Empire AI to build the most powerful supercomputer in the country for academic research, and it's already happening. Thank you to the legislature for supporting this. It's all part of our effort to create a sustainable economy that can withstand the test of time, because there is no plan B if we fail. Why is this so important to me? Because my fight for your family includes making sure your kids and grandkids can have the jobs of the future right here in the state of New York, powered by clean energy. Now, I've highlighted just a few of the essential elements of my battle plan. I assure you, there are more than 200 proposals in our State of the State book, and you're all going to enjoy reading them late tonight. And thank you to my extraordinary team again, and my policy team, and everyone who worked so hard on this, the budget team, the senior team, the cabinet members. There's no break yet. We have to do the budget next week. Sorry, Blake. But our 2025 blueprint will continue. It'll continue our fight for New York's children and families. So let's recap our priorities. Driving down crime, lowering taxes, investing in child care and education, jobs, new homes, clean energy, small businesses, and building a strong economy that'll endure for generations. Yes, it's bold, but as Wayne Gretzky once famously said, You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And I'll always take the shot. I've spoken a lot today about families, the shots I've taken and will continue to take. And that caused me to think about my own family, especially my father, who died unexpectedly when I was heading off to Israel in the wake of the October 7th terrorist attack. Right before I was heading into a war zone, I wasn't sure if I should call him and make him worried about me, but I decided to call. And it ended up being my final call to him. He said, "Dolly, I'm so proud of you, but keep your goddamn head down." That was my father. But I'm sorry, Dad. I can't keep my head down. Because you taught me you don't keep your head down. You charge into the necessary fights. And as you always said, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. You compete and you compete hard. And among the values that my parents instilled in me, most importantly, is you always fight the good fight. It is that fighting, competitive spirit of New York that makes us all so great. We see that spirit in the greatness of our champions, like the New York Liberty. Well, the leader knows they went from playing before a few thousand fans at the Westchester County Center to 3 years later becoming national champions in front of wildly enthusiastic sellout crowds, cheered on by those incredible timeless torches. We see it in the Buffalo Bills. Written off after a long 17 years of a playoff drought, now poised for greatness, with our own MVP, Josh Allen, leading the charge. Uniting New Yorkers everywhere to believe again. But it's not the winning that defines the champions. It's what they do when they get knocked down, getting back into the fight. And it's not just our star athletes who embrace that competitive spirit. It's embedded in the DNA of everyone who calls themselves a New Yorker. Because we're tough, we're gritty, we're resilient, proud, undaunted in the face of adversity. This is the New York I've witnessed in every corner of this state. I'm in awe of the strength of our families, our seniors, our students, our teachers, our farmers, our veterans, our entrepreneurs. And as Jillian Haynesworth said in her poem, "In our home, the sun always rises." Yes, it does, Jillian. The sun always rises in New York. And I'm proud to lead this state through adversity. 3 years ago when I took office, our state was in crisis. We had to take decisive action to right the ship. And despite the many challenges that we see on the horizon, that sun is still shining. We see it in the more than 1 million new businesses that have opened across our state since I took office. 740,000 new jobs, private sector jobs created that we've added. We see it when our LGBTQ+ community feels safe to be themselves. We see it when New Yorkers with disabilities feel supported and empowered. And we see it in the vibe and vitality that has returned to our great cities, from Buffalo to New York City, where the sidewalks are crowded, the restaurants are packed, and Broadway is back. So, as we continue to focus on the many New Yorkers who need our help, let us resolve today to take on those problems with a heart and soul filled with optimism and a faith in our future. That's how we overcame the Great Depression and inflation in the 70s, the downfall of industry, 9/11, the Great Recession, a global pandemic. Because this is the Empire State, a place of comebacks. We overcome adversity. It's who we are. And we get knocked down, or anyone gets knocked down, we'll make sure they can get right back up again. Because your family is my fight, and I'll never, ever stop fighting for the great state of New York. Thank you very much, everybody, and go Bills!
The Bills make me wanna kick your heels up.
And that was Governor Kathy Hochul, who, after 1 hour, just delivered her 4th State of the State address, this time at the Hart Theater in Albany's Capitol Complex. You're watching special New York Now coverage of the governor's speech in partnership with the New York Public News Network. And we're going to briefly consider what we just heard, what we didn't hear, and what might get done in this year's legislative session in Albany. And to do that, we're joined in the studio once again by Chantel Smith, head of the New York practice for Tusk Strategies, and Ian Pickus, news director for WAMC Northeast Public Radio. So Ian, to me, what stood out rhetorically was this idea that the governor is a fighter, something that we noted as she came out to Christina Aguilera's fighter. She also talked in that same vein about always taking the shot, getting up when you get knocked down, and that was kind of the recurring theme to me in terms of the journey she's on. From policy stance, I thought she talked a lot about this idea of putting money into people's pockets. She's trying to sell us on this idea that I'm going to get $5,000 back into, say, the working families, into their pockets, whether that's something that's actually realized or whether people actually feel that way when all these policies get enacted. If they do, that remains to be seen. But coming back to your specialty, which is producing the news, what is the headline or the story that you're going to be focusing on directly out of the speech?
Early in the speech, I wrote down spam sandwiches, ? You could really see Governor Hochul trying to make a connection to people's everyday lives in this speech, whether that's issues like going back to school and getting a better degree, having your kids get breakfast or lunch at school without worrying about it, making it easier to get a home and buy a house, which is a struggle, as we know, that she's been focused on for the last several years, down to feeling safe on the New York City subways. She personalized the speech in as many ways as she possibly could have. And after watching her for the last several years, it's not a huge surprise because she's always stressed, hey, I'm the first mother to be the governor of New York State. Now she's a grandmother of New York. And she can lean into that in a way that people who came before her can't in this job. And I thought that's really what she was trying to hit today in a very sort of sweeping and let's be frank, a long speech for her.
You talked about what she was trying to do. Rhetorically, though, do you think it worked in the room or will work when you're clipping up sound from this or when people are tuning into their nightly news tonight and watching a 30-second soundbite? Do you think that works, that theater of it?
There are some headlines to take from it, certainly. You know, adding a police officer to a subway in the off hours overnight for the next 6 months, that's something you can definitely point to as a concrete headline. She is not known as a great orator. It's not the most natural setting for her. But I did notice when she talked about, meeting people on the trains recently on the Long Island Railroad, she was really trying to hit home the average New Yorker's experience. I think there's a lot to take away from this speech for her on that front. And we'll see, as we noted before the speech, what's actually in the budget next week and what's paid for is another conversation. But for today, I thought she hit a lot of the marks she was hoping to, as best we can tell.
Chantel, when the governor brought up school meals, she got probably one of her biggest rounds of applause in the theater. When she brought up her initial pitch on involuntary commitments, I think you could have heard a pin drop in the theater. There was then some applause for some of the ideas about providing services to people. But based on the reaction in the room that we could hear from the feed and your own ears listening to this speech, anything stand out beyond what we talked about before going live?
I think nothing stood out. Her subway, where she was talking about, increasing the barriers, and I found interesting more law enforcement on the platform from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. with state funds. It was silent. And though some people want safety in the subways, there's a debate amongst legislators, what's the best way to have safety on these subways? You know, there was an incident in New York City where someone was running, it was toll evasion, but there were cops there and people ended up getting hurt. Like they shot someone for toll evasion. So it's like, yes, you can have an increased presence of police, but what type of police, the use of force, is it necessary for some of the crimes that are being committed on the subway? That's going to be where the disconnect and the fighting will be with the legislature. I thought, you know, you could hear a pin drop when she talked about expanding involuntary commitment. You know, I think people want to find a way to deal with mental health, as we discussed earlier, but if you don't dedicate the money and the resources to like do something after someone's been committed, I don't see where, you know, I don't see where the legislature is going to go. There were a lot of things from a staffer. I think if I'm Times New or something, there are tons of headlines. But if I am the counsel to the speaker, or I am the counsel to Andrea Stewart Cousins, I'm a little anxious because the money, you know, everyone, yay, universal child care, yay, money for community colleges, yay. But there's stuff in here like, you know, the repeat offender, she discussed discovery loss, which discovery is very contentious. And if there hasn't been these fundamental changes since 2019's budget, and they've done this, you know, criminal justice stuff every year, I'm anxious because I know in terms of the speaker and the majority leader, this is something they don't want to do. You know, it's just interesting to hear her talk about some of her ideas. And when you hear like no clapping, it's because the legislature is not clapping because they don't support it. Yeah. I think Times Union, the press, they will have tons of headlines. Hip, hip, hooray, more cops on the subway. New York Post is gonna, they probably won't give her an ace for that one, even though they should. But like there is gonna be problems getting these issues across the board with the legislature.
Yeah, we talk about the reaction in the room, but this is kind of a unique room. It is filled with lawmakers.
Well, there was a lot of performances too. Like people were sitting there for a while, though I enjoyed the dancing when I could watch it, you know, but you know, this started at 1 and the governor started speaking at what?
1:45.
So if, you know, and then there's a whole, you got to walk through. If I'm a legislator, you got to walk through to get there. You're sitting there, you're probably 10 minutes early. Then it's 45 minutes of singing and entertainment, which the public probably enjoyed, but you know, it was a very long time to be sitting there. So there could have been an enthusiasm drop because they were there for a while.
Well, I was thinking about in terms of this already being a receptive room. This is a room of Democratic lawmakers. There's government people there. There's people who want things from the governor. There's no lobbyists this year, but there are the clients who hope to get things through Albany, so they know to clap it in the right moments. But the general public, Ian, what do you think resonates with them about this speech? Is it the idea that we're going to have SUNY and CUNY become more accessible? Is that something people care about? Is the fact that they're going to talk about discovery something people care about? There was no mention really of additional changes to bail. I saw in my Twitter feed, though, that Republican lawmakers were saying, unless they move and cash bail, Governor Hochul's not serious about public safety, which to me makes me think that right or wrong, the governor's not going to make any positive headway on the public safety front. But Ian, what do you think from this speech is going to connect with voters when they are thinking about Governor Hochul? Is there any part of this that makes it into their consciousness? Or is this all just for show?
What's your timeline? I mean, if I'm an average New Yorker and I'm getting a check in the mail a year from now, you know, that might go a little way. That could help a little bit. If I'm 30 years old and I want to change careers and now I can re-enroll in community college and have my books paid for, I might feel that. Do you connect that with a speech that the governor made way back on January 14th, and then it got muddled through the budget period? I don't know about that.
That's the part. She needs to keep the pedal to the metal on all this stuff moving forward, right? I mean, this idea that you can say things once and gain traction is probably not the way things actually work. And we've seen that with this idea of the rebate check, and the governor has been trying to push that. She's gone shopping in multiple places. It wasn't just Albany. So I guess the idea, and Queens, you know, as she thinks about pressuring the legislature, Chantel, the governor needs to, have her advocates out doing this, her representatives pushing this? Does that influence lawmakers at all?
So this is what I always say: when you are trying to get something done, You know, the days of calling your lobbyist just doesn't work. Having your lobbyist call your elected doesn't work. There need to be campaigns because it has to be full blown out. It has to be a legislative campaign and it has to be a pressure press campaign. Governor Hochul can, and I said this once, I think last year, I thought the social media proposal, first in the nation, it was something everyone can agree. Social media is harmful. I did not feel she did enough to tout that, like, in the press and really keep the momentum of like, I did this. I'm the first person in the country to do this. So yeah, she has great ideas. Like, you know, she has, you know, the school idea. Like, there's just a lot of good cell phones in schools, even though I personally disagree with it. And I just want, my sister corrected me. I have 3 nieces, not 2. I actually said
you
2
have 2
nieces.
favorite nieces, apparently.
No, I have 2 nieces in school. Sorry, Keisha. I have 2 nieces in school, one that's like, you know, in like preschool. So anyways, she doesn't have a phone. But there are a lot of good ideas. But the governor now needs to get an advocacy campaign and have advocates and these companies and these people to go out there and spread the word. There needs to be op-eds. And it can't just be the governor saying, it's people you trust and rely. Pastors, people like teachers, people in your community. She needs to do a full-fledged campaign to get people on board, because if you get one good press hit out of the New York Times, because today in the New York Times, she got a lot of good press hits for some of her initiatives, but there's no campaign to like really deploy the message and get people to understand that when they get that check, it's because of Governor Hochul. What's the point?
Yeah, it seems like the best way to really sell that message is to come on public media, whether it's New York Now, the Capitol Press Room, any of the New York Public News Network.
She does fireside chats.
She does seem to love fireside chats. Ian, have you guys thought about putting in a fireplace over at WAMC?
You might have to keep the fund drive going for an extra day or 2.
Yeah, but I think that is part of the problem, though. From my perspective, when we try to get the people who are pushing these issues and are connected with the administration on our show, it can be a fight sometimes. You know, we ask for their people who speak to these issues to come on. It's not necessarily always the easiest thing. Although I will say, today, peeling back the curtain on Albany a little bit, they did have commissioners and other supporters of the governor's agenda available before the speech for interviews. And I thought that was an important messaging thing that we'll see how far it actually goes beyond today. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's coverage. But tune in to New York Now on Friday for additional analysis and reporting on the activities at the Capitol. My thanks to Chantel Smith of Tusk Strategies, where she is a partner, and Ian Pickus of WAMC for spending their afternoon with us. I'm David Lombardo. Thanks for watching.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET.